camera. Wow.
Oh, because of the...
Yeah.
It's the chair.
Oh, I'm going to have to move
Or
this.
just move the chair.
But also
and I'll
this.
figure out how to... Oh, I see. Oh, yeah. That's tricky. Move it back.
I had it aligned, and then... Man, you are a little taller than I had it aligned. That's okay. You know what we can do? This is not the first time I've played with the camera after starting stream. Everybody knows how this goes. We'll start class in a minute. Oh, that's not gonna work. Alright, you know what? We're gonna have the camera mostly on you.
Peak of prophecy. I don't know that. Or Big Ben. Can they hear me?
Yes, they should
So
be able
I should
to
be
hear you.
asking what Peak of Prophecy, what does that have to do with Valhalla?
Actually, let's do a soundtrack real quick. Can you guys hear both of us? Oh, you're doing your final paper on this game? All right, Frosty Fast, I expect the best questions from you then. All right.
I'm guessing yes, because I'm seeing yeses.
All right, excellent. So hello, everybody. We are playing Valhalla. I just downloaded it a few minutes ago, so, I'm going to be terrible. That's fine, because we have a guest today, Dr. Scott Meller. I said that right?
Yeah.
Good.
Perfect.
Who teaches in the folklore department. Who's going to talk to us about using Valhalla to teach one of his classes. And I'm going to just... Oh, no, wait. I had one announcement. So I don't know how often this happened earlier in the semester, but I did catch the copy and pasting other people's comments for credit, i.e. cheating. So I am changing your grade next week for a 0, and I will be now periodically checking for this. So... Pig of Prophecy is apparently one of your students.
You are. Hi. But of course, I can't figure out who you are based on that Pig of Prophecy.
Shut your hole and fight.
Anyway, well, then you know all about this in some ways. So I thought I would start by telling you a little bit about who I am and how I got here. But then I'm also looking at the chat, so I have no problem with chaos. Just ask me questions. Cross?
I don't know that game.
I don't know it either. Oh,
Yeah.
can you turn the
Hold on.
game volume down?
They
You've got yourself and the camera kind of cut off too. Do you want that?
I...
Because if I were here, then it would be alright.
I mean, I can maybe move over a little bit, but I'm not sure I can get the camera back any further.
No, I just mean twisted a smidgen your way.
Oh.
Because otherwise they can't see you. There you go, perfect.
I feel like they see enough of me. Alright, hold on.
That's good. I can just do a little bit of this too. So, I thought I'd start by telling you a little bit about who I am. I always like to tell students a little bit about who I am and how I got into this. Okay, Twist Minova. I guess you were in my class too. Here we are, all back again. As I said, I can't tell who you are based on Twist Minova, but hi. So
The remote for the TV is broken.
the remote for the
So
TV.
that, I know there's volume control.
Okay.
Feel free to keep talking.
All right,
while
I'll
I
just
figure
keep
this
talking.
out.
So, just those of you who are thinking about your college careers, I just wanted to also say that, so I started out with the idea that I was going to do natural sciences and physics, and here I am. So it isn't over till it's over. And one of the things that happened between high school and college was I decided to take a gap year in Scandinavia. And to some degree, that was an accident in terms of going to Scandinavia, but it kind of set my whole career without me knowing it. I did my BA in linguistics, and then it wasn't until I was doing my graduate work that I ended up in Scandinavian studies. And I did my MA in Scandinavian linguistics and my PhD in folklore. And my dissertation, and this is where this kind of comes into play with my teaching, which is part of what I'm getting at here, is how did I get to this place where I am? when I did my dissertation, I did something that combined linguistics and folklore, but was also looking at what was known as the Poetic Edda. And between the Poetic and the Prose Edda, this represents, I guess the game's still loud.
I know, I actually couldn't find.
I bet the volume control is actually in the game itself.
That is probably true. I wonder how to get to.
I can't remember how to do that.
Yes,
I
Big
think
Ben,
it do-
where settings? What button?
Oh, sorry, I'm answering the game that it's in settings. Yeah, I absolutely do. I think that, it gives you perspectives. I mean, sometimes you can't travel. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I like using gaming in my class, is because I can't take students to 872 Norway. And so this is a way of trying to do something like that without being able to do that. So surely they're thinking the gameplay is in the menu. That
Yep,
setting is
got
in the
it.
gameplay menu. Oh, found it. Perfect. Excellent. So I started my college career, my teaching career really in Old Norse Studies, which is why this was kind of interesting. But also during the 90s when I was in graduate school, and this is something that, I like to tell people too, because I'm not always sure that sometimes students realize, that they see me or they see colleagues and they think that we just came out of the womb this way and we didn't have a life before this, and that we don't do, fun or maybe even sometimes ridiculous things. So I, during the 90s, did a lot of gaming, but it was, D&D and things of that nature. It was role-playing games, but, the old-fashioned role-playing games with dice. But also I got my first PC, and I think about 1990, 1992, something around there. I think it must have been 1990. And one of the first things I did was buy Heroes of Magic and Might. Wow, that was cool. You really smashed that guy's head. So gaming is something I did to have fun throughout the 90s when I was in graduate school. And then another part of this in terms of pedagogy and teaching is I sort of developed with a colleague a Hans Christian Andersen online class in 1998. Yes, online classes in 1998. We all scrambled to do it for pandemic, but I was already doing it in 98.
Wow.
But in those days, it was like fly to Denmark and film, and we had a grant for $250,000, which was crazy. Yeah, I know. It was crazy money back in the days when there was crazy money to be had. How do I think about the myths and real histories in games? Yeah, that is an excellent question, and that's one of the things I try to bring up in my class. They've done their homework. So, the question about this, is this authentic or is this historical? The answer to that is complicated. It's both yes and no. On the one hand, this game never happened, and I think you all know that. On the other hand, they've done their homework. And on the third hand, there are holes in our knowledge about this period that you could drive a Mack truck through. And when you look at TV shows and movies that depict this period, first of all, it's interesting to see how they've changed since, if I'm going to arbitrarily say, maybe 1958 with the Viking, where they had, everybody had a sword. They didn't have horns on their helmets, but everyone had a sword. Their understanding of the material culture has gotten better. If you look at the Vikings TV show, then it is much better in terms of material culture. But now we've got sociological culture that's problematic. Now, there were a couple people who asked me questions, and they flipped up across the screen faster than I could read them.
Okay, so you're not going to get to all of them because
No.
you won't in an hour, so don't worry about it.
All right, so I should just...
Just go
let's
with
see,
what
how
you
does
see.
teaching games, how does teaching using games that are specifically designed to teach, with teaching in mind, differ from teaching? That's not a question for me. I use games to look at images of the past, because one of the things that I can do by playing this game or having my students play this game is give them an experience. As I said, can't take them to 872 Norway, but we can play this game and you get a feel for what it's like to, sail a ship through a fjord. You get to see somewhat cartoony, but nevertheless some of the landscape that actually is in Norway. It looks pretty good. And we can start from there to address some of the issues of what gaps do they have to fill in order to give you a good gaming experience. Let's see, are any of the games that you can think of at the top of your head that have completely unrealistic depictions of history? Well, sure. Skyrim doesn't have a realistic history portrayal, but I don't think it's meant to either. Baldur's Gate's even worse, but again, I don't think it's supposed to. Maybe you were meaning things that actually were supposed to depict history, in which case I can't think of any. I spend my time with Minecraft and this game and a couple of other games, so that's my experience anyway. Do you think these types of games that give history... that went too fast.
So I can pull it back up here.
Okay, great. That went too fast.
You were looking at... Do you think these types of games that give history of the past are better designed by older adults than, say, younger adults? Something that made me question this is the fact that these older adults were around closer to this point in history, and most of them
Okay, well, it depends on what you're talking about, because whereas it is actually factually true that my age is closer to the Viking age than yours, not enough to make a difference. I mean, I suppose that might be true if you're doing a game about the Cold War, then my perspective on the Cold War is probably different having lived through the Cold War. As far as the Viking Age, I think the only thing that gives me a different perspective is the number of years I've studied this period of time. But that's a great question.
So,
I love that question.
Story, I had a student in this class, not this semester, but this class, different semester, tell me that the reason I knew more about World War II was because I could remember it.
Except that you can't because you were born after. I hate to tell you this.
My parents were not born. My parents were not born during World War II.
My mother was born in 46, and my dad was born in 45, but October. So yeah, the war was over.
Yeah, that stunned me.
When I look at this, though, this in a way both helps conceptualize fighting methods, and I think it actually is fighting methods. Notice how nobody here has a sword. They're all fighting with axes. Very few swords. Swords are one of these things that if you're an actor, you don't want to be the person without a sword. But Vikings were not fighting with swords very often because the quality of steel was pretty poor until you get into the beginning of the 10th century, and then there was only one or two sword types that were any good. So that's one of the things that's kind of fun to talk about. Let's see. The ancient Rome and Greece, mainly, and ancient Greece, was originally what originally sparked those interests and encouraged. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly why I think gaming's kind of cool, because it does spark an interest if this is done right. And that's one of the things that I've changed in my own teaching. I used to have all the modern images at the end of the class, and now I've put them at the beginning of the class and use them at as a jumping off point, which I think is much more interesting. And it's interesting that I'm speaking faster and faster as I'm trying to read these questions. So I'll have to learn how to not do that too. That was too fast too. Okay. Do you think video games that are,
Sure.
They go way too fast for me to read them. I'm not that fast of a reader.
Do you think video games that are historically accurate could be effective teaching tools for students? If so, do you think it would be more effective in a classroom setting?
I don't know about, I think they would have to be in combination, because you're seeing a lot of images right now that are really useful tools for me to jump off from in order to teach this period of time. Some things that are really fun and interesting, but they have to be contextualized, and we have to talk about what we know, what we don't know, and what they've filled in as gaps, and what they've done in order to make this an interesting game. Because all of those things are involved in what they're doing here. Let me see now. I think that games can do a lot of good with teaching people or getting them interested in some history. But do you think that there ever is a case where video games could take away from learning? Then it jumped up, and I think I got it, the gist of that. Well, it's like everything else. There's a lot of things in life that are a lot of fun and a lot of fun to play with. And there's belief systems. I teach folklore classes. There are belief systems that are fun and harmless until they're not. And when it becomes harmful is when it starts to affect the way that you see the real world. And in this case, when you start thinking this is a complete accurate portrayal of the past, that can be problematic. If you start telling your friends, well, in the Viking Age, a person named Eivor went into a village and killed a lot of people, and it was really cool. That can be problematic. So you have to kind of also have that critical thinking apparatus that allows you to look at this and say, I am getting an image of the past, and it is an interesting one, and it is useful for both my curiosity to go the next step to figure out what am I missing and what things, what's the scholarly apparatus that they're just giving you a product at the other end. Some of them have some of that information about what happened in the scholarly conversation, and then they're not usually part of creating that scholarly conversation. So there's a little bit of perspective on that. Let's see, if a game like, okay, I don't know that game, sorry, and that jumped up. Are there any parts of the game that you would change to better reflect their culture? Yeah, I guess there's one. By and large, I find this game to be a lot of fun, and I'm not sure I'd make too many changes. But one thing that kind of bugs me is that at the very beginning, and I understand this is a common thing with Assassin's Creed, you can either choose your gender or have the game choose it for you, and you can play as male or female. The deceptive thing here is that if you choose female or female is chosen for you, you're not really seeing a very good portrayal of a female world. You're seeing at best a representation of an exceptional female who's doing some of these things, and probably not even that. And you're really getting a male story played as a woman, and there isn't a way to play this game as a woman. There's things women could not do in the Viking Age. In the Viking Age, women had some agency. That was diminishing. Some of us scholars think that probably started to diminish in about 536. Why do you say 536? That's a pretty exact date.
That is very exact.
That's because there was a volcanic eruption.
Oh, nice.
Probably a volcanic eruption, though there's some debate about whether it was a volcano or whether it was a meteor, but it doesn't matter. From my perspective, that's another department to figure out that. But what happened was there was a large amount of ash that was put in the atmosphere and cooled down the entire European continent, which meant if you were in the north, there were a number of winters for the better part of a decade where the sun basically did not come out. And some scholars think that might be where the Ragnarok story comes from. Those of you who don't know what that is, Ragnarok is the end of the world, and it is described as 5 winters together without any summer. That might have been where that came from. But what we know is that if you look at the material record, there were a lot of women in positions of leadership, and that between around 530 to about 750, those numbers decreased. It seems plausible that the cult of Odin took over some of the female cults and subordinated them. We see other things that are going on in the south as a result of this as well. So whereas women had agency, they still did not have the same kind of agency, and certainly by 872 that had diminished considerably. So Eivor's character here, I wouldn't say it was impossible, it's just very improbable and unlikely, and she still is playing gender male even if she's sex female. And if you understand the difference between gender and sex, which you probably do. And I just saw another question I was thinking of, but now it's Bubbles.
I went to sleep.
Hopefully that didn't go on too long.
I have a question for
Sure.
you, and that is, so it sounds like you are not a longtime gamer. So what caught your attention here and made you decide that you wanted to use this for teaching?
Well, 2 things. First of all, I played games in the 90s.
Okay.
And of course, in the 90s, there was a monumental leap between 90 and about 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it happened for a couple of reasons. One, I was already looking at images in television shows and movies. 2, it was the realization that gaming is a bigger industry than TV and movies. And then all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and I was in search for things that would build community that could be done online. And so I started with Minecraft, And then I realized that there was some really good education that could be done looking at Minecraft. And then I found out about this game. As you all know, it came out the end of 2020. And I thought, well, I got to play the game. And then when I played the game, I realized this game has got to be a game that we're using in class. Because these are, I mean, what you're doing right now. I can't get a group of students in a boat like this and sail down a fjord.
That would be so cool.
It would be so cool if I can. I mean, I have for years joked about how I want to actually, as a class project, build a Viking ship.
I want to take that class.
And this year, I've decided that what I'm going to do is build a model of, there's a scale model that you can build of a Viking ship. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just build a scale model, right? By the way, this segues into some of my other research, which is about ship and shipbuilding and ship narratives from a group of islands in Scandinavia. From the 1950s, which I have much better access to. The person who said, I'm not born in the 50s either, but at least I know the people who were. But at any rate, do you think the value of gaming community adds to the value of teaching history through gaming? I'm going to answer that a little bit roundabout way because I'm not sure I know with regard to the gaming community, but I absolutely do know with, for example, Creative Anachronisms and other people who seek to do things in the way that they were done in the past, and how that can be a symbiotic relationship with scholarship. And I'll give you an example. So we know that there are swords. We know they were really crappy. We know they didn't fight with them very much, and we know that there was Ulfric's sword, and it was much better. And we knew that they had gotten ingots from Persia and brought them up and brought them to probably northern Germany, and then with these ingots they made a better type of sword that you actually could fight with. The question was, how did they make those ingots and how was that steel made? So a document was discovered. Now, of course, Persia is part of modern-day Iraq. They discovered a document that described the process, and a guy from no less than Door County took that process and decided he was going to make a sword based on their description, and he did, and it worked. And it was like, there you can sort of see how, here's somebody, I mean, I'm sorry, I am never going to make a sword. I will watch you make a sword all day long, but I am not somebody who's going to like, oh, I'm going to just, I'm going to create a crucible and I'm going to melt out the iron. I knew the entire process from a theoretical, but now I could actually watch this guy make parts of the process and do it and have it come out as a sword on the other end. And he said it was much stronger, much more flexible, wasn't likely to bend and break and so on. So that's not so much with gaming. Also, gaming is filling in gaps. And the creative filling in of gaps can at least help us to start thinking about, then you can go back to the record and say, do we have any proof it could be this way or not? So there's a little bit of an answer. I see what you mean. There's like a million questions that went up, and you can't possibly answer.
There's 127 people here, which
Oh,
actually
yeah,
means a
right.
large portion of students are absent today.
Really? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big class.
The class has 200.
Do you believe that taking a sacred text and casually depicting its stories in adventure games is a form of appropriation? Wow, is that a question? First of all, that is, oh boy, I don't even know where to. So here's the whole cow, and I have to start with a bite. So as a folklorist, one of the things about folklore is a lot of our understanding of culture and identity, a lot of it comes from the 19th century. Folklorists at the beginning of the 19th century in Europe, I'm specifically talking about Europe, went through Europe and started to collect stories. And then came a process throughout the 19th century of collection and then reappropriation and purification. So what does that mean? What did I just say? So they were collecting. Then what they had to do was make the determination. They were collecting and they were interested. And why were they interested? Because speaking of the North specifically, if you take Greco-Roman culture, it had wiped out a lot of Scandinavian culture, because when they converted to Christianity, there was this feeling of, we have an inferiority complex, we're building our buildings out of wood, they're building them out of marble, they must be better than us, they've got certain other technologies that are better than ours, so even when we had technologies that were better, still that must be inferior. There was a huge inferiority complex and a desire in the 13th century to become more like the South, which relegated our stories, I'm sorry, I'm speaking now as a Scandinavian Northman, relegated our stories down to what was called low culture as opposed to high culture. In the 19th century, there was a reevaluation of that. There were people who would collect folk tales, try to figure out how they represented the past, which is highly problematic, and reappropriate them. That is to say this is our culture. These are Norwegian stories. And then purify them. These are Norwegian stories, and they're not German stories, and they're not Swedish stories. And that largely was part of a national romantic process to create nation states. And I don't have time to go into all of that. So now flash forward to today, you get at the end of the 19th century groups that try to recreate what we do not have, and that is rituals from the pre-Christian period. We did have the Eddas, which are the texts, but they were part of an oral tradition that were written down. Who wrote them down? Christians wrote them down. So highly problematic. Now there are today people who take these texts as being their now religious texts and have created new rituals to go with them. Because there are no rituals. I mean, there are not no rituals, but there are virtually no rituals. So if you're talking about taking something like the Eddas and using it in a text like this, there's no continuity to the past. So what you're talking about doing is appropriating from people who have also appropriated. So now what do? You see what I mean? This becomes a huge question. Is it appropriating in a game like this if the people who are today believing in some of these rituals and religious beliefs themselves, if they've also appropriated it because they didn't have it from the past in a continuous line? I think I'll leave that as a philosophical question for you all to think about. I'm not going to touch it. The meaning of anything is given by humans. Yeah, sure. And so is the game. Yeah, absolutely. It can be given the meaning.
Oh, that's a long one.
Oh, it is. Okay.
It can be given the meaning of entertainment. It can also be used as a teaching tool. But as far as games are concerned, most educational games are used as aids to help learning.
Right.
I feel that what we are doing now is more about finding education in games rather than making games from an educational starting point. Oh, I have many thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'll leave that to you.
Do you think games can be called games if they are made from an educational point of view? So the short answer, Error, is yes, right? But also, I think the reason that you're seeing that games are not being made from the educational point of view is because for a long time, and I say this as a person who makes and studies educational games, they've been really crappy. Basically what people do is they emphasize learning because culturally we have this idea that play is, distracted by people, that play is meaningless and it's not important and it's not serious. And so by emphasizing the learning, they can make it serious, right? But I think that this game and everything that Dr. Mellor is talking about right here is a point of how that doesn't have to be true, right? So like in this class, you all play games as part of your homework and you are learning something from that. I sit here and play games and now I'm playing a game within a game. And everyone here learns something from that, right? And so that alone really shows how these past ideas are just not true.
And if I can throw in the fact that education is doomed if we can't find ways to make it experiential and interesting, and if it's only going to be me lecturing to you, that's going to be a problem. Interestingly,
Yes.
Fun fact, this game doesn't exist.
I was going to ask, but I didn't want to cut you off.
There are games that do exist. That being said, I know you can buy a copy of this game. That is to say, Ubisoft has actually made a physical copy of this game that you can buy. And I'm very tempted to buy it and bring it into my class, even though this game totally does not exist. That being said, there are games we do know they exist, and we have a fair idea of what the rules were, not a perfect one. There are tough games that were played, and I bring those into class too. And I actually have a couple of parts of those games that are 1,000 years old that I also bring in, because I've got little pieces from the game, and that's kind of fun too. So that brings up the point. And why were they playing games? Because it teaches strategy. The games they were playing, the games that we have that they were playing, were teaching strategy. So that just goes to show that educational games, good educational games, have been around for a long time. Do you think it's a good idea for schools to use video games as a medium to express trauma and historical events? Sure, why not? Again, if it's contextualized and done in a good way, I think it can be. If I just say go play this game, that's not really an educational experience. if I sit here and make comments about how that game didn't exist, but the other game does, and some other things. So now they're saying try flitting, and this is interesting because you have to know what a flitting is.
I don't.
And I know, and how many people know what a flitting is? So I have, in minor ways, on a rare occasion, I have an advantage in playing this game. A flitting is an exchange of insults. So how well can you insult each other? So let's see what they decide that they're going to do. What is it? I always put down a few coins for wagers. Okay. As far as we know, there was never any wagering going on in flitting, but flitting was one of these things that you see even in like Beowulf. There are moments when you have these moments where people are jabbing each other. It was believed at this period of time that you should be as good with your tongue as you are with the sword. That being, of course, a modern way of phrasing that. That is, you should be as good a warrior as you are a... So warriors were poets, and warriors should be good with their words.
That seems to be... So I'm not sure if that is because media and not an actual thing. But if you look at media of various cultures from around the world, that is a very common trope. And actually, now that I think about it, I know the answer to that. That is across cultures because you also see that in Chinese culture.
Okay, fantastic.
I'm gonna...
I didn't hear what he said. I'm afraid I wasn't paying attention.
Neither was I.
So apparently you did all right. You're looking for things that do internal rhyme, use kennings, which are words that mean something, refer to something else. And his name is Alvis, which is hilarious, because Alvis is the name of a dwarf that fights against Thor in an exchange of a flitting. And Thor, and this is one of the rare occasions that Thor is being clever, because he's actually holding it off long enough so that Alvis, who's a dwarf, stays in the sunlight and turns to stone. And you probably recognize that from a guy named Tolkien who used this later on in The Hobbit. And Alvis, by the way, also means all wise. Rewording a question I asked earlier. Do you think that games that reinforce things like the great man theory, okay, and reinforce a Eurocentric
conception of technological progress or worth
Yeah.
using as an educational aid, with the teacher pointing out its flaws, providing students an interactive example of these flawed ideas, or should they be left out of the classroom in case that students absorb these false assumptions?
So I'm pretty open on these things. I think that things being left out is a mistake, but I do think they need to be conceptualized or contextualized. And I think the way that you just said it was great, because if you describe the flaws, you're looking at something which you can say, this is a prevalent paradigm in our society, and where are the flaws in this paradigm? And therefore, that's an educational experience. Here it is, you're experiencing it in this game, and now here's some of the flaws in that, and here's some of the ways in which it is a transparent component of our culture that needs to be made visible.
And that is not specific just to games, right? So the piece they read was about civilization. That's why you saw a couple of those questions.
Okay.
But if any of you were paying attention, maybe this came up in your discussion sections. That piece has a little bit of a white man savior theme to it, right? So you have this educated white man who goes into this inner city school to, save the day. But I assigned it anyways because, yes, that may be problematic, but if you take that out, there are still things to be learned from this, right? And so I agree. Also, leaving things out is really not the way to do, but also contextualizing it so that they don't get absorbed, as you are asking about.
You're being bombarded with images like that all the time, so making them visible so you're aware of them, I think, is a great educational tool. I mean, things are invisible to me too. I'm constantly like, oh my gosh, I can't believe what my assumptions were on that, random hypothetical thing that I'm talking about right now. I can't believe I didn't see that. Here's an invisible component of my culture, the way I've been raised. The 4-lane highway, I talk about it. And it's like sometimes you got to get off that 4-lane highway and realize it's there, because it's really easy to get back to it. Sure. Worse than women in Viking time example. I want to get that question because it looks like it could be fun. Is there a game that stands out as having butchered the representation of some history? Worse than women? I'm not sure that the woman in the Viking time example that you're seeing here is necessarily a horrible one, because like I said, I think it's an open question whether there were exceptional women who were really acting gendered male that were on Viking expeditions that were actually there. I think that might have actually been a thing. There's, again, it's open question. So I don't think it's a terrible thing, but you're not getting gender female, even if you're getting sex female. And again, I hope you understand the difference. But are there some that butcher history? Probably. I'm afraid I don't know if I have a well-rounded enough. I mean, I can tell you about terrible History Channel experiences, but that's TV and movie.
It's media. I feel that's okay. I know that you have many thoughts on the History Channel Viking show that I have heard some of that already.
But games. Are there games that really butcher history? You know, I don't know. Sometimes people ask me, I'm going back to movies again. Some people say, what do you think of the movie Thor? And I say, I like it. And then they say, well, is it a good depiction of the mythology? I said, no. But I don't think Marvel's trying to do that either. So, I don't know. I think I'm falling down and answering that question. Many games based on pseudo-history recruit professors, researchers to create as an accurate a world as possible. Have you ever used your own knowledge? Not for gaming, but I have been on the History Channel a few times. It's been an interesting experience. That's probably what you were referring to. I think there's more to that question. So, have you ever used your knowledge to create a game's storyline or lore? No. I personally think that you use games to supplement your course material. Yes, I do. There are many benefits to such collaborations. I think you're absolutely right. I have, and colleagues of mine have worked with movies, but never games. Up to this point. Maybe you can recommend them. They must have gotten some help from somebody, because there's some pretty specific things in this that they can't just have read them and then put them in. They have to have read them, and then somebody has to have explain to them what they're doing. So somebody, I don't know who, and I don't think it was any colleagues I know, but somebody helped them with this game.
And that's not uncommon for media in general. So I consulted for a sci-fi author a couple years back. So people doing that, and I actually, of course, then was like, okay, instead of payment, I have my own questions. And he had explained that this is a pretty common thing for both film writers and book writers, and so why wouldn't it be the same for game creators, right?
Right. Because you are writing a book.
Yeah,
you're writing a story. I mean, story on the good ones. I mean, Minecraft doesn't have story, and there's some interesting problems with Minecraft that way. I mean, what do? You mine things to craft things, so you can mine things so you can craft more things. This has got story to it. And you're trying to figure out what the story is as you play, and you become more versed in the story. And as you become more versed in the story, some things become easier, and then the story gets harder. So I find that to be really interesting. Lots of people argue that the history was written by the victors, is what I'm going to guess. Lots of people argue by the winners, yeah. How can games address this issue? If they are trying to introduce real history, is there any way to provide a more comprehensive view of true history? I think the way you do that is you try to convince Ubisoft that it is a profitable venture to take on a Sami gaming platform or gaming storyline when you're playing this. And at that point you should say, who are the Sami? The Sami are the indigenous people that lived in Scandinavia that we don't talk about very much, that I don't think show up. I have not seen them show up in this game, but they're people that live to the north of the people that you're looking at now. We usually call the people you're looking at now the Norse. That's also a problematic word, but we have to choose some words, so I'm going to choose that one. But if these are the Norse, then there are a group of Sami that live north of them. What are some of the cultural differences? They spoke two drastically different languages from drastically different language families. What are you trying to do?
Drink.
Yeah, I know. Why aren't you able to drink, though? There you go. All right.
I didn't understand that it wasn't hold, or I didn't immediately understand how this was working. So what's happening.
Okay.
So interestingly, in northern Finland, there is a serious games conference in an area where the Sami live.
Interesting.
I keep wanting to go, and it keeps not working out.
Yeah. But there are nomadic people as opposed to the Norse who had more agriculture. And that's one of the other big, and then of course the Norse also had metallurgy capabilities and the Sami didn't. The Sami were nomadic people that followed the reindeer herds, and they had other capabilities. And there's a lot of cross-cultural exchange between the two groups. There's a lot of probable Sami influence in some of the Old Norse myths that, as we have them. So that just explains a little bit who they are. How should game convey and express the real story in history while still being creative? Yeah, that's exactly the
Now I'm drunk.
challenge. Now you're drunk.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Isn't that fun? Let's see. While still being creative and appealing. Well, I think I know games could show fully respect to a real history. I think, again, if I'm going to just use this one because we're watching it and playing it, there's some really good historical components that you're learning from playing and watching this game. The Norse drank. So this isn't like totally unreasonable. Why do we know this? Because there are laws about how much you have to pay depending on which finger you've cut off at a party because you were taking your knife to cut off a piece of meat while you were also drinking, and you missed the meat and you cut a person's finger off, and you pay X amount for a pinky and a different amount for a thumb. So we know they were drinking, getting drunk at parties, and they were cutting off each other's fingers because there's laws written down for that. So you're learning something from this, and yet you still have agency. Crystal still deciding how to get drunk, and deciding to get drunk, and then deciding to run off when she is drunk. And now I'm not sure what you're deciding. Oh, you're getting a tattoo?
Getting a tattoo.
Oh. This is, of course, also a very fun open question, and that is the issue of tattoos. And did they have tattoos? And the answer is we don't know. And why don't we know? Because what happens to skin when it decomposes? And even if you found somebody with a tattoo, you don't know whether or not that was like typical or atypical.
Yeah, so I'm actually partially surprised that there's not at least a couple of people, because they're so far north, that didn't get frozen or whatever, because there are archaeological examples of tattoos, right? So I'm thinking like the Iceman had a ton of tattoos.
Right.
I do think...
And then,
I'm not going to say it now. I'm like, did they really burn their dead, or is that a media thing?
No, they flipped back and forth between cremation and inhumation. So, that's the other thing. Did they ever burn their dead in a Viking funeral ship, right? Because that's the image everyone has. That image comes from about 3 stories, 2 of which are fictional. One of which is from an Arab, describing something which he is clearly appalled by and doesn't know what he's looking at. Mm-hmm. Okay, so those are pretty unreliable sources. Yep. And then comes the question of how representative, if it did happen, how representative is that? And there's a problem in the archaeological record, because you know how hard it is to excavate a burnt ship?
Yeah.
So this becomes part of the we don't know, so why not? And I rather think this has more to do with our society because of the increase in desirability for tattoos that have happened in, say, the U.S. in the last 10 to 20 years. If you go back to 1980s, hardly anybody had a tattoo. If you had a tattoo, you were making a radical statement or you were in the military. Now, I don't even know what the percentage of people. I have tattoos. That just shows you how common they are. If I've got them, they're really common. Is it true that video games have an impact in our learning experience when it comes to actual history? How can individuals be affected by
and use it as a learning tool? Would this practice have a significant impact on users if a specific game contains false information about history?
Well, I think we're back to that issue of it depends on. Well, but that's a problem. The false information about history. Our information about history constantly changes. One of the reasons why in the 19th century they thought that Vikings may have had horns on their helmet was one part costuming for opera and one part misunderstanding of Bronze Age versus other ages. But it wasn't like an attempt at making fake history. It wasn't fake news. It was an understanding of the archaeological record that they had at the time. In other words, it wasn't very good, and now it's increased. Then people thought everyone had swords, because there are a lot of swords that are dug up out of the archaeological record. And then they realized, well, that wasn't true really either. So things change constantly. Our understanding of history changes. I don't know if I answered that question.
I mean, I think you did, and it's fair. I would add that, sure, depending on the representation, there could be a danger, right? Because we also politically use history and call to it for current day problems, land rights, and those things. Not saying that calling to history in and of itself is wrong, but when you have, it can be weaponized in ways that can be dangerous.
And we typically understand history through our own lens.
Mm-hmm.
And it, you know, even I don't mean to say this as though I'm some sort of superior person. It really has to do with the fact that I've studied this for 30 years, and I still cannot get completely away from the fact that I look at history with my own lens. There's no way to get past that. So even after 30 years of training, and trust me, things have definitely shifted, I cannot get back to the year 1000, no matter how hard I try. The past is in the past. So I'm going to be looking at it through my own lens. So those issues of race, ethnicity, gender, we are informed by that. No better example. If you go back to scholarship prior to 1970, it was all about, you know, sort of the masculine tropes that you see about the Viking Age. It isn't until the 70s that you get things changing a little bit. And why do they change? Because there are, in this case, 3 women specifically who enter into Norse studies. There weren't any women in the field. And then in the 70s, very early 70s, you've got Jenny Jawkins and Carol Clover, and to some degree Patricia Conroy, in case you care about these names, who become Scandinavianists, who become Old Norse scholars. And just because of the fact that they're women, they start looking at these stories and going, I don't think this, you're not seeing what this is about. And now I look back at it, of course, and say, well, no, we didn't. I mean, they had to come and inform us because of their life experience. And we went back to the records and say, yeah, they're right in many of these cases. So history itself is changing. You know, we are still humans writing this. History doesn't change, but our interpretation, our understanding of it does, because we're the ones writing it. I'm caught between 2 questions, and you're caught between...
So Thesir lives in the mountains north of Fornburg.
Yeah, good luck with this one.
Oh, great. I'm so lost. I just started going to the mountains of the north. I don't know if I'm in the right place.
This is a good time for your Odin Eye.
Oh God, I forgot about that. I think that's this button. No, that's not.
I think it's the up button, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. The biggest thing that makes me die in games is forgetting abilities that I have.
Well, the good news, I don't think you're going to die at this point because there's nothing there to kill you, but it is useful to actually sort of... And then once you do see it, then there's like a little, you know, that what do you call it, measuring thing that goes on the top.
Oh, yeah.
Then, see, once you see this,
okay,
then that sort of
directs
you to it. Although that can be problematic too, because it tends to direct you bird's eye view, and then you can't sometimes get there bird's eye view, but that's another issue.
Okay, so I should be able to just go back, right?
Yeah.
That's going to give me what I need? Yes. All right, here we go.
I'm trying to figure out where, I think I know where you're trying to get to. But I have to say I've only been paying attention, to be honest. In terms of video gaming being historical, would you say that there is a difference between the game representing a good depiction of history versus the game merely adopting a historical event for the premise of the game? Ooh, that might be for you. If there's a difference, how does this overall way the game was conveyed affect the audience? How can it be beneficial or consequential for both cases?
I don't know. I mean, if you have thoughts on this, please jump in also, right? So I'm not, like, I describe myself as a history nerd, right? But I'm not a historian. I'm an anthropologist. So I tend to take that lens. And in that sense, the idea of adopting a historical event, I would think, can be very helpful. But then again, as an anthropologist, my sense of what's important is knowing, well, why did this event happen?
Right.
What was the cultural context of that? And whether you depict it like completely historically accurately or not doesn't mean you can't learn a lot about the cultural context and beliefs of the people, right? Which is also to say, again, like I said before, these things can also be used in very problematic ways, right? So it's like, yes, it can be good, but also not. It has to be used carefully. But that's also true of any tool, right? Like, it's, you know, a small example, but like, I have this controller, it's a tool, I'm using it to play the game, but I could throw it at the TV, break it, and then be responsible for replacing it, which I don't want to do, right? But like, that is a use for it. I can do that. I mean, I don't know, from folklore perspective, do you have anything different that you would say to that question?
Well, that's the problem. I wear too many hats, and so I think I'm confused by how I would approach that kind of a question. Because I'm a medievalist, so there's a historical, therefore there is a trained historian in me in a very specific period, and I'm also a folklorist, so I'm actually more interested in the cultural stuff that's going on at the time than the hyper historical. But I think that your comment about the, what is the context of the event that's happening is very important to me. And sometimes that certainly gets, in this game, that's another component that kind of gets washed away. I'm filling in because of the things I know. I'm filling in pieces of information in this game. And when I play this game with my students, then I can tell my students what I'm filling in. What's interesting to me is sometimes I'm filling in things without realizing I'm filling in. When you've done this for 30 years, it's like you're filling in things that you don't even realize that you're filling in. And so sometimes that's where students become invaluable. They ask good questions, and they ask you this question, and you say, oh my gosh, I'm not even sure I thought about that, and now I can answer that question, or at least we can problematize it, because oftentimes there's questions that I can't answer because we just don't know. That's pretty cool.
I mean, also when it comes to any of this, and I don't know if it's, only nerds like me or if it's anybody else, but while playing this game, when I'm done playing this, or while I'm watching Vikings on the History Channel, because yes, I'm doing that right now, like, I Google all these things.
Yeah.
Right? Like, whether or not I know anything about it, I will sit there and be like, oh, I wonder if that's true, and then look up what actually happened.
And then I have about a three or four maybe layers of, so I watch the thing. Is that true? I want I want the McDonald's of information. Wikipedia, right? Go to Wikipedia. They're pretty decent these days most of the time until you get into controversial issues. But, if you're staying out of those, you can look at dates and things and say, okay, that date was right and that was right. Then you can go into a greater Google of looking, has anybody written this and who has done it? And then, of course, there's the whole full-on scholarly investigation with who's researched this out. And, it really depends on where my interest is how deep I go on that. Which one?
I just completed a quest that was not the quest I was trying to complete.
Oh, that happens, yeah. I completed
goodness.
I completed a quest at one point that was a quest I didn't know existed. You're running around and you do something.
Right,
you've completed this quest that didn't exist.
I was like, oh, great. I'm still trying to find the seer that lives in the mountains. Still.
That was one of the things that I found really interesting about this game is you could go on a quest and never figure out how to do it, and then at the same time be doing all these other things. Then at some point it seemed like I just wanted to give up on that. I felt like the quest became too much of a focus.
Sure, yeah.
It was almost like you're forcing me into that quest. At this point, and I thought you were looking for, one of the seers that,
I think maybe I should go to this, because it's blue.
Well, that was what I was about to say. When I got lost, I would just go head for a blue thing.
Yeah, that's...
Because usually something would happen there that would either put me back on track or something. Let's see what people are asking here now. Thank you for answering my question. I have to agree that when video games depict history, it being either right or wrong brings exposure and curiosity to learn more about the real events. Exactly. That's, I think, one of its values. And I, however, do feel a sense of amazement, though, when I do learn that what happened on the screen did actually happen in the past. Exactly. Now this, by the way, what you're looking at now did not happen. There's no Eivor to the best of my knowledge. I mean, I'm sure there's a person Eivor we can find in some record that did something, but but they come across characters that actually exist. Like they come across an Ragnar who's at least in a legend, and some. Alvis, for example, was a riddle teller. Okay. I believe that. Let's see. I believe that. I believe that have a truth of the real history is important. Accuracy is important. Yep, especially for educational purposes. There's more to that question. It went bubbles, but you fixed it. But I can almost stop right there and say accuracy, I think, is important, but we also have to realize the limitations of our understanding of the past. And the further you get into the past, two things happen. The more we can have gaps, and the more the gaps can be huge. And also, the more that we tend to compress history. Like this happened in 872, but when we talk about the Viking period, which is usually 750 to 1100, then the texts that we're often working with are from around 1220 and after. We tend to think that those texts were somehow really close to the events that they depict, and they're not. So what do? But they're both in the past, so it's okay. So if you're in 1220, oh, you didn't die. I thought you were going to go. So if you're in 1220, do you have a better understanding of 870 than I do? That's a problem, because I would argue maybe you don't. Or maybe you do in some ways and maybe you don't in others. One of the ways you may have a better understanding is there may not have been that many advances in terms of technology and so on. Therefore, your understanding of that component of life might be better. But on the other hand, you may be so impacted by cultural events going on in 1220, like Christianity and looking to the South for cultural innovation, that you may miss things about 870 because of that particular bias. Whereas my bias is a whole different kind of bias that might get me a better understanding of the past. And by the way, who even gets to determine which one is better or not? Oh, is this a bear? Don't do that.
No.
Well, you can try.
It attacked me first.
Okay, well, it looks like you're doing okay. Yeah, polar bears are mean. I ran away from the polar bear. Let's see if you do better. How do you know how bad you're hurt? Oh, there you are. You're the. Oh, you did it! Did you do it? Oh,
I did.
Wow, but just barely.
Yeah. And I don't think I have any like health potions. Let's see.
Can you eat and maybe that'll make you happier? I suppose I should look at questions. Okay, that's somebody telling you something about the game. What you pinged on your map is a random mystery quest that's not related to the main quest.
Oh.
Okay,
God.
good to know. Good to know. Rations are health.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking. I thought you could just eat and it would help, but so rations.
Do
are
I
health.
not have rations?
Well, you were full. I thought you had rations because you were.
I have used some.
Oh, okay.
But I can't. I don't see a thing that is like labeled rations.
No, actually, you should have bunches of berries and things like that. Is what
Right. I wonder if I ate them all.
This could be bad.
This could be really bad. Maybe I
This
should
is-
just look for berries.
This is why. What? There's some right over there, aren't there? There's some
yeah.
right over there.
Yep.
Yay! Those should be cloudberries.
These guys, right? Aren't they?
No, they're not berries. Oh, they look like berries, but they're just red
Oh, I hate
flower.
when
They're
that
just red
happens.
leaves.
All right. So.
You might just get healthier by time too. Let's see. There are berries you can pick in the world, or they are in your gear. Yeah. Yeah. The problem is that she thinks she ate all her berries. And I thought those were berries, but they're just red leaves. That's my eyesight.
So if I, yeah, you know, if
Probably
I.
going the wrong way if you're going to try and get berries because you're going up the mountain. And...
But I want to go toward the quest.
Oh, okay, sure.
It's also true that we only have 15 more minutes in class, which is also why people are disappearing now.
Oh, I see. Right, we're down to 84.
I should have had Frosty come and play instead of me, clearly.
So if we bring the game to class, Does that slow the speed of class flow? It does, but then the question becomes, what are the advantages to going slower, and is it all about going fast, or is it about actually deeper understandings, and maybe doing less can be more? For example, if you spend more time compared to reading historical books, because the video game needs to provide beautiful, oh, well, that's a good point, beautiful visualizations and detailed instruction to get the player interested. Also, each video game only covers parts of history. The students need to play lots of games for class. Because of the more immersive learning experience, do you think bringing video games to high school is better? Well, I think that a couple of thoughts. Definitely slows down teaching. And therefore, it is my job, and hopefully I'm up to the task, to make the decisions of what are we gaining by playing this game, and is it valuable with regard to class time. So that is definitely a component of my decision-making process. I can also say, is it really valuable for me to have you read tons and tons of text that you don't understand? That's another problem. If I just had, okay, fine, we have 14 weeks, read 28 sagas without any contextualization, that also is a problem in teaching. Teaching that way also probably isn't going to work. So there are balances both with text and with video games. And if I'm going to bring a video game to a class, I definitely want to make sure it takes a piece of time and not all the time. And I also want to make sure I have time to contextualize and, have some of the discussions about what they're playing, what they're viewing, and the assumptions that are being made by the game maker, where they may have come from, what the images are, where they may have come from. And so that's the valuable component, because you already came to a class like the Vikings with images in your head to start with, my guess is. Nobody comes as a complete clean slate. And so addressing those images can be very valuable rather than just either ignoring them or dismissing them. In high school, boy, I'm not sure I'm qualified for that, but I have to say that one of the things I think is valuable about high school is to try to get people excited about learning, and this I think can do that. So that might be a reason to bring it into high school. And now that she's choking, I'll let Krista Lee also weigh into that question.
Of course.
You think it's ugly? Okay, that's interesting. I'd be interested to know what your comparison is.
Odyssey is another Assassin's Creed game.
Yeah, I don't know it, so I can't.
Your question assumes long-form games, which, in my opinion, as a player, I tend to like the long-form games based on history. But those aren't your only options, right? So you guys are assigned to play a game every single week, and it certainly isn't this game, right? So you're not going to finish it in a week. And I go through and play a different game every single week, and so you have been exposed to, probably close to 30 games by the end of the semester. In addition to the readings, right? And so you can have the bits of history that are useful without necessarily having deep immersion. It depends on what you're teaching and what your goal is.
And it's really good to, as a pedagogy, as somebody in terms of pedagogy, you've constantly got to think about what are the learning outcomes. What am I trying to achieve with this? And one of the things I'm trying to achieve a couple things by doing this. One, giving an experiential component to the class. That this is one of the few ways I can do that. It also is good for community building, which is something I don't think should be underestimated. I think having an element of fun in education is also a good idea. And then it also is a jumping off spot for us to address tons of questions. Because if I can get the students to talk about this game, and if I can create for them some intellectual competencies and curiosities, then they're going to be more willing to start asking questions. If I hand them a saga and I say, what do you have for questions on this? Likelihood I'm going to get crickets.
So I want to bring up a question just because now I'm seeing back and forth in the chat for it. So the original question was, do you think that games should put in a disclaimer on if it's historically accurate or not? And it was a little longer, but that's the gist of it. No, that's fine. And in chat, they're talking about certain disclaimers are a good idea, is mostly what people have been saying. And the way I originally read the question, I was thinking that they meant like not a disclaimer right in the beginning, but like going through with individual things, which I think would break the immersion and ruin the game.
Yeah.
But doing something in the beginning and saying, hey, this is based on but dramatized
Right.
would be fine.
I mean, it brings up a big problem in our society when you see something on television, you think it's true.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're really struggling with that in the last decade, you know, I mean, issues like QAnon and things like that, where people can, you know, if you start to doubt, if people are successful at undermining the credibility of news, because there are issues with news, then you can undermine the credibility of news. Then you can get to a space where therefore anything can be news. Therefore anything can be true. And now you're in a really serious place because sure, you have the right to believe anything you want, but your ability to live in the world is going to be more and more problematic the more you drift from certain types of understandings of the world. I mean, we can problematize that too with an earlier question of, you know, are you just doing a Western European epistemological view of the world? That's certainly a valuable thing to talk about. But it's also something one needs to talk about too. But if I say the world's made of cheese, I mean, that's going to cause some trouble. If I think the world is flat, my ability to live in the world is going to get problematic.
So this question, what do you think is more effective for teaching, to learn about history while playing or be inspired to learn afterwards? I think accurate games can help you learn while playing, however unrealistic games have potential to be more entertaining, leading to more engagement of this historic material outside of the game, maybe. So I have one comment real quick, and then I'm going to throw it to you, and that is, and, you know, this is very common in Western culture, but stuff doesn't have to be binary. Mm-hmm. It can be both, right? And so I don't think that the answer is, oh, one or the other is more effective. I think that also is going to go back to a previous answer about like, well, it depends on your learning goal in that moment and for that thing, right? And I also think that it's very helpful to stop thinking in terms of binary because it really limits the possibilities for everything, for learning, for your life, for the options you think you have open, and even for doing your job and getting, you know, ahead in the world. Like, be creative outside of this binary, and the world is going to be so much bigger for you.
At least look at it in terms of continuum. That's limiting too, but at least you're not just here or here. You could be on a scale between here and here. So are we following up, Wolf?
Yes, we are. I drank something.
I have nothing to add to that comment. That was perfect.
Oh, thank you. So I drank something. I think I'm high now.
But that's okay, maybe. You maybe need to be in order to follow the wolf to get to this place.
Yeah, I think this is some kind of like hallucinogenic vision quest or something to that effect.
And that, in terms of our understanding of that, probably comes from the 16th century understanding of the 10th century.
Oh, of getting high and going off.
Yeah, there was this whole big 15th century thing about, or rather 16th century thing, about how the berserkers would eat mushrooms and go crazy because they were on psychedelics.
Oh yeah, I've heard about this.
Yeah, that comes from the 16th century. It's ridiculous. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
I don't do that very often, but sometimes it's like, no, that's just crazy.
Well, you know, okay, so Berserker Society, I think it's interesting that there's this idea of taking drugs and going on a vision quest is not...
That's not crazy.
Well, and it's also very common, right? So
right.
I've also heard a theory that is what the Oracle at Delphi was happening, right? That they were sitting over a house or whatever. Whether that's true is not what I'm talking about, right? But this has come full circle. I was just listening to NPR on the way to work yesterday, and they were talking about experimental therapeutic uses of this, where people are given ecstasy or MDMA,
Right.
and then being led on these journeys with a therapist in a controlled environment through like trauma or PTSD. And the way in which they were talking about it is very similar to what I've read or seen in media with this idea of vision quests.
Right.
I am not advocating drug use. Just putting that out there.
No. And I'm not saying to some degree that there might not have been some sort of drug use. I'm saying that the problem is trying to find evidence for it. And the evidence all comes from the 16th century and is very suspect. Mm-hmm. That's my point as well. I find it very probable that people took things and went on vision quests, because that's also a very, if you will, shamanistic thing. And there's certain shamanistic components to this culture that were sort of still in play, though they weren't shamanistic themselves.
I have recently read that there's evidence to suggest that animals also purposefully get themselves high off of certain substances, and I'm like, that right there tells me we've probably been doing it since we evolved. Like,
bees get high off of fermented fruits.
That makes sense to me.
And there's a question about purpose. Do they do it on purpose? But when they find that particular fermented fruit, they all go there before they go to the other non-fermented fruit. That sounds pretty purposeful to me.
Sure, and well, it makes sense. Like,
do you want the apple cider or do you want the hard apple cider?
Right. Like, if you do something and you have a good experience, you're going to do it again and tell your friends, right? Like.
I didn't hear what she said, so I can't even. And I can't remember this either.
So I think she's asking me questions about the vision quest, and.
Well, Odin's Hall opened to you, and there were no Norns, from what I remember. And I hope I didn't.
No, that's okay. So there was 3 originally, and I said the wolf beckoned to me, because that was the thing I remembered the most.
And then the wolf went through the door, and the doors opened.
So it's just making me go through all of these.
I guess so. Well, I don't remember seeing that. And there's another thing, the spinning of the threads of life. That was probably from the Greeks. So there's another example where Greek culture, probably in the 13th century, came into some of the ideas of this, because it looks as though the Norse actually thought of fate being a liquid that was served.
Oh.
Which, of course, goes back to both alcohol, but it was also served by women, because women were primary to the understanding of the fates and the being able to prophesy for the future. Men were not supposed to do that. Only women were. And we think we understand that the sort of idea was that the reason women did that was because a woman is born of a woman is born of a woman is born of a woman, and a woman has a woman has a woman has a woman, and that gives you connections to the past and the future.
That makes sense.
And once a man is born, a man doesn't have any children, so that's done.
But these distance carry a terrible truth. The missing arm, the trail of blood, the beast. You will betray your brother, Sigurd. That is the meaning of the vision.
Oh, you're going to betray your brother. That's nice.
I would never betray Sigurd. He's my brother.
A big no-no in Norse society is to betray your blood kin.
This is their message.
No, this is wrong. You misunderstand. That cannot be right.
You will betray.
So we only have 2 more minutes of class. If you have not yet put out something to get credit for, now is your time. I imagine everyone has.
Sure.
I'm kind of surprised I got that done, considering how lost I was for what seemed like a very long period of time.
I am too. You did that really well. I'm also glad you're playing the game and not me, because I now can absolutely say I could not focus on this game and try to answer questions at the same time, or have a dialogue. You spent 60 hours, huh?
Good job.
Frosty.
I expect a good paper.
Okay.
I thought I was pressing fast travel, and then I got here.
And that was odd.
They're all required to play a game and then write a research paper on how learning is portrayed in that game.
Right. A lot of good questions.
This is a good batch this semester.
Yeah. You heard that. At least 62 of you heard that. Happy happy face. Yeah.
They must be finished now. The king has called for his best meat. So the
All right. Well, it's 3:44, so I'm going to use this last minute to say, I don't know, any final thoughts?
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming.
It was
This has been
fun.
great.
I feel like I keep learning too. You know, I come at this from a different angle, so I'm not a gamer. Well, I am a gamer. I'm a light gamer.
Okay.
How's that? And I like playing these games, and I like learning about what people are learning about.
Yeah, thank you. Great. We have some comments. Yeah, all right. So what? We only have 2 more weeks of class because somehow the semester is ending. That's it. I will see you guys next week. Thank you again for coming.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody. So give it a minute. We are still broadcasting.
Okay.
I've had